All right, so what's going on, everybody? My name is EMD, and I'll be showcasing this case study that I conducted on EMD, right? So EMD is an asset, and yeah, I mean, so far that's all you know. It's gonna be very interesting. Hopefully, does spark an interest in you guys, so that you can stick through all of this presentation. And yeah, let's get started. All right, so the question I'll be trying to answering today is EMD the asset that completes the YM-RTY triad, right? Very simple. And yeah, so these are gonna be the contents of this presentation here, and I'll be going over every one of these, share my thoughts, bunch of things that perhaps aren't in the slides, and yeah, so let's get started. Objective here, it's very simple, is I want to prove to you that EMD completes this triad. And so let's go over the methods. Very simple. And even here, I'm going to be doing some research, right? I'm going to be sharing with you what I learned about this asset. And then we're going to be doing forward testing. We're going to be analyzing essentially sequences and cracks and correlations between all of these assets, right? And yeah, we're going to be doing that. So the research here, this is kind of boring. I'll try to go over this a little bit quicker than usual, but yeah. So very simple. The EMD, which is the ticker trading view, it's just the S&P 400, which again, if you look here, it is technically included inside another index, which is the S&P 1500 with the S&P 500 and 600, and it's just a mid-cap stock, right? It just includes mid-cap stocks inside of it, right? So that's very simple. And then right here, it's a product of CME. It's under the indices category, and it's also under the S&P, obviously, right? Very simple, not so much, right? So the question here, first question is, so if this asset exists, is it even tradable, right? So let's try and answer that question. As you can see here, right, this asset doesn't have a lot of volume, right, which translate into pretty much it's not having the cleanest chart during Asia and London. If you're familiar with this right here with HO and RB, you're probably gonna know what I'm talking about, right? But during New York AM, right, this volume right here is pretty comparable to other asset we already trade. But yeah, it's just, you gotta understand that it's not definitely like much lower volume than all the other indices we are used to trade. And yeah, and by the way, just a heads up, like if you do ever want to try and trade it, EMD is just like RB and HO, where you're gonna have a little bit of slippage potential, especially with market ordering and like where it's like pretty much, yeah, I do I suggest you use limit orders if you ever want to try this trading this asset, wherever, even if it's paper trading. But yeah. All right, but the question is, what if it didn't have to be tradable, right? Because perhaps it's not the cleanest. You're gonna have you're gonna enter a position, you're gonna be down, I don't know, if you use one mini, you're probably gonna be down like 100, 200 bucks. Kind of not worth it, right? It's like, why even like make this presentation? Well, it's because that's the whole point, right? It doesn't have to be tradable for it to be valuable. I think about it. Just like HO and RB, some prop firms, they don't offer HO and RB. You can't really trade them, right? Obviously, if you have a live account, you just pay for the data fee, then you can trade them. But on prop firms, right, some prop firms don't require, like they don't allow you, my bad, to trade them, right? But that doesn't mean we're just gonna take them off our watch list because you can trade them. Like you're just gonna look at CL, right? That's not how it works. So yeah, there's some programs that do actually offer you where you are able to trade EMD. They do offer that product. But essentially here, this whole presentation is not going to be about that. It's just going to be about the role of EMD. And in this triad, right, which is, if it actually completes it, right, which is what I'm assuming here, it's going to be very, very valuable, even if you can't trade it. or you're gonna be understanding sequences that if you didn't know about EMD, you wouldn't be able to, right? All right, so now let's go into the next section, which is gonna be forward testing. So this is where I'm gonna be sharing you bunch of slides, bunch of Figmas where there's plenty of examples that go over sequences, right? We're familiar with and whatnot, crossing correlation, and yeah. And something that's pretty important here as well is that, which I outlined here, is that the importance of an asset related to its triad is if that asset most of the time it's a middle asset or the leading / lagging, right? Just like ES, if you know like the crossing correlation between leading and lagging, which are NQ and YM, they're always going to be more important than the crossing correlation between like ES and NQ or ES and YM. Again, because these two assets are usually leading and lagging, right? ES is most of the time middle asset. So what I can say very confidently is that EMD usually is the leading or lagging asset, while YM-RTY are often middle asset. So this also kind of explains a little bit of things. Have you guys ever seen like YM and RTY reverse off of like kind of failure swings? And like, why is it reversing, right? It will make sense if they're the middle asset and the leading asset potentially being EMD hits our objective or reverses like right away, then perhaps YM-RTY are going to be a reversal for failure swings. But if you don't know the existence of EMD, right, it's going to be very hard to predict that, right? You just don't, like, imagine trying to predict NQ reversing over failure swing because YM hits it, but you don't know YM exists, right? Yeah. All right, then. So let's go over the examples here. So sequences and whatnot. And just a heads up, these are not all the ones I found. These are just the best, really the best showcases of these, this asset and this triad. And yeah, so that's gonna be all, right? It's not gonna be a lot. So if you really wish, by the way, if you're really interested in this, I really hope you are, but if you are, there it is. So there's the date where I took the screenshot off of, not screenshot, the Figma. I did the Figma of a sequence, right? So if you're gonna go over this day, you can definitely do that yourself, right? Before like I present to you the actual like Figma done, or if you want to look at the crossing correlation of sequences yourself, you can definitely do that. But yeah, perhaps, sorry if I bored you, but yeah, let's go over that. All right, so there it is. This is a daily time frame here of the day you just saw, and so we have a range low right here. So we engage with down range low, and then we print transfer PSP right here, and that's the same range low. We are transferring PSP. Well, this asset doesn't take the low, but since RTY doesn't reverse, then we either need to sweep the low potentially, right? Because this candle is not a C2, so ideally we to take the low and then we reverse, right? So if you look at YM-RTY here, it's a very clean sequence, right? Because we take this right here and it's paired with an SMT break, right? Because we actually take this low. But if you look to the right here, this is EMD. This is literally the same sequence, except this asset actually holds the SMT, right? Right here. So there's trend switch. It's a very clean sequence right here. And let's go next, right? And obviously, wait, before we go next, right? Obviously you can see here, there's a PSP to confirm the gap, right? It's the same. It pretty much looks the same chart, very similar, and they all get to the same. Look at the same draw. Look at these equal highs here, right? All right, so then let's go over the 20th of May, 2026. Here, it's gonna be another daily chart. And although this is not the cleanest, I think it really adds value, right? So I always try to keep the asset on the left to be, okay, my bad. So what I was trying to say is that I always try to keep the asset on the left to be either the lagging or the leading. In this case, this is the lagging asset. So we have still a very big range right here. So we take the range low here, daily swing, we get trend switch, and then this asset doesn't take it, right? This is something I was talking about earlier, where if you just look at YM-RTY, you'd be very confused as to why we reverse here. Like look at these equal lows. Why did we reverse there, right? It's because this asset actually takes the low, and then we get strength switch between the lagging asset and the leading asset. Now again, this is not the cleanest sequence because technically you want this to be range low. I don't know why we were just chopping this much in this build PA. I really don't know. But yeah, sorry. Obviously, this is the leading asset. It gets to this high right here and fails to input it. So we can expect the middle asset to catch up and eventually even the lagging asset, right? So as I said, if you only look at YM and RTY, right, you're not really going to be able to tell why we're reversed, right? Because we're missing a piece, in my opinion, obviously. So this really adds context, right? All right, so let's go next. It's going to be the 15th of June, 2026. And this is going to be an example where I start from the daily and I work our way down from the, we're going to profile the day and we're going to find something interesting about this day. So there it is. So this is another sequence here. So we open high, this is a new week, open high, we break SMT, which if you guys know, right, these also already trade through it, right? This was the leading asset, trade through it first, then RTY caught up, right? Now we break SMT. This can probably cause at least a retracement most of the time, right? So that's what we're going to be looking for since the day opens high first. All right, so here's the 4-hour chart for all these assets. All right, so we open high. We do have an SMT with this high right here, right? We had it here, right? I didn't really chart it here, but because it's kind of weird. But so we have that. But what does RTY do? It breaks the SMT, right? And if I go to the next slide, we're going to be able to see that at the SMT break, we get a 2-stage, right? Well, if you look, right, this is YM, takes this 90-minute PSP high, 90-minute PSP, we take that, we don't take that, right? So this is a 2-stage, and if you look at the next slides right here, you're going to be able to see that there's also a 15-minute transfer PSP, right? And that's very powerful, right? But why did YM not deliver the low, right? That's a very good question. So remember when I said that EMD will allow you to trade certain sequences in its own triad, right? This is an example, right? So we gotta understand why YM did not deliver the lows, like 1800 low day, right? It just never resyncs. We do get that transfer PSP, but we don't get continuation, right? So this is again the lagging asset. So leading and middle will hit it right first. All right, so if we look at the main indices triad, right, you can clearly see that YM is the weakest in this triad, and then Q and S are not reversing whatsoever. There's no crossing correlation. I didn't go over the daily, but there's really no crossing correlation. We just expand from the open too much to where can't really assume we're gonna go and hit it, right? And again, now if I go back to this triad, you can see clearly this is the lagging asset, this is the middle asset, and this is the now leading asset that eventually breaks the SMT. And as you can obviously tell, right, YM in both of these two triads right here, it's always the lagging asset, right? This is the deepest retracement before 6M expands, right? No, I don't think you can trade this higher, but either way, you can see that this is the lagging asset on both of these two triads, right? Which really just explains that in this case, you wouldn't want to be trading YM, right? But you could potentially short RTY. Why is that? Because RTY is the weakest in this asset, in this triad, my bad. Well, this asset perhaps is retracing, which by the way, we got 15 minutes transfer PSP, so you can't really assume that it's only retracing. It might be reversing, right? It might be the leading asset here to the downside. But in this case, it ends up not being because these two do not reverse, right? But in this case, in this chart, this sequence here, it's definitely tradable, right? Because 2 out of the 3 assets, all assets were reversing. It's just this doesn't really continue, but you can trade the weakest, right? To the same draw. Because this is a very good draw. You just open high, very clean sequence, right? Stress 50 minutes stress PSP. That's great. That's perfect to see. All right, so let's go over the next sequence here, which is going to be the 7th of July, 2026. I'm going to be framing this trade or the sequence here on the 4 hour, right? So this is previous high. So we take that. Do we reverse? Not really. We cannot just consolidate around that, right? So what do we need for that to be valid, right? An SMT break. That's ideal, right? That's an ideal sequence where one asset holds it, this asset breaks the SMT, and that causes the reversal, right? So let's go over inside of that WPA. This is where we break the SMT right here. And so this is the lagging asset, which right here it's PSP, and then we get strength switched right at open, right? Unfortunately, this is not really the same high right here. So it's not the cleanest PA if you look at this, but we'll go over EMD as well, RTY and EMD chart. That is a lot cleaner, right? So right here, immediately as we break this SMT, we expand away, 930 comes back up. So while this asset trades into a gap, right? This asset doesn't take the current high day, which is the gap high on RTY. And that's a strength switch to potentially resync the markets, right? So this right here is the sequence between RTY and EMD. As you can see right here, as soon as we break the SMT, we get a PSP and we expand away. Now, in this case here, we really don't get any strength switch between YM and EMD. So this is not really the cleanest, but we do see that this asset right here is the weakest, right? It's the low first, prints PSP here, and doesn't trade into the gap. All right then, so let's go over the next example here. It's gonna be the 10th of July, 2026 again. So this is gonna be the daily chart. Here the week opens high first into a key level right here. We have SMT with that. Really not the cleanest if you ask me, but that's fine because we expand away, we leave fair swings at the lows, and we create a gap, right? So these assets right here already did trade into a gap. Well, this high, previous day's high here, is the gap itself on YM, right? So as you can see here, we are aligned for lower prices. And this is going to be the 4 hour chart. So again, we have SMT with previous day's high, but YM doesn't really reverse or kind of runs through it. You would see it later on the hourly. But this asset right here, when this asset breaks SMT, that causes the reverse, right? Well, this asset is holding it. That's perfect. What do we also get? 4 hours transfer PSP. And again, this is valuable because if you only look at YM-RTY, you're just gonna see this asset run the high, SMT break, that causes a reversal. Great. Okay, but there's no auto confirmation, there's no PSP, right? There's no transfer PSP between the lagging asset and the leading, which is what we're gonna see. And right here, that 4 hours transfer PSP is also confirmed by an hourly strength switch before that even is the case. Again, so this also runs through the highs. So ideally we do need to break this SMT. So we actually do break it. And this is perfectly wicking it. You see how it's not expanding past the SMT high? That's perfect. The swing high, not the SMT high. So, and then what we get? We get strength switch between, again, the lagging asset and the leading asset. That is perfect. But if you only look at these two, it's really just going to be an SMT break sequence where we expand away on both assets. All right, so let's go over the next sequence here, which is going to be the 6th of August, 2026. Okay, we're getting into a closer to the current day. All right, I didn't really want to choose like old examples, so I tried to incorporate the latest examples that are also pretty good. So right here, what do we have? We have SMT with previous day's low, which is a gap. I didn't really show the daily, but whatever. That's all you guys need to know. All right, so we have SMT with previous day's low right here. This asset runs through it a little bit. Then we break the SMT and that causes a reversal. So let's go ahead and look inside this middle PA here. If there's anything we could trade, right? Perhaps we can frame a trade. So right here, this asset runs through this low already. Down here, does it reverse? Not really. So what do we need? Technically, you don't really need this asset. Like if you didn't know about EMD, this asset is just resouping the low at 930 and then reversing. So that's perfect. But if you look at EMD, what do we get? We get SMT break, this asset wicks it and immediately reverses. You also see like how high a day to previous low, it's a very, very small range. So this asset, since it also prints a PSP here, it's also going to hit this high first, right? Now, RTY eventually gets there as well. But yeah, this technically, pretty much with this, turning into the leading asset, but we'll go over that in the next slide. Which right here, if you look, so there is structured PSP between the, well, this is the metal asset because it breaks SMT, right? So between the metal asset, we have structured PSP here, YM prints bearish, which, what does that leave YM as? YM supposedly is the leading asset, but it never resyncs, right? And I don't know if you guys remember, but this is something Garrett took, right? I'm not saying he used this logic. What we explained in this video and in this trade recap pretty much is that he used NQES as a confluence to trade RTY higher, right? And then my question becomes, what if you didn't have to use NQES, right? What if you just traded this triad, right? What if you knew you were trading an SMT break sequence, right? Or why does like RTY reverse there? You could arguably say, because it's 930, right? So it resoups the low and 930 delivers higher, right? It's like because of the driver, but there's also a strong switch between technically it's middle asset and lagging asset, right? So it's not the best thing in the world, but it still can deliver. And my question, the other question would be, would you be a little bit more concerned, right? The fact that you're trading a middle asset here and a decoupled triad, right? And right here is something we can observe in this sequence, right? That's different from the previous ones. Not all of them, but some, like pretty much all, like the majority of them, all right? So it's that in this sequence, EMD is the one that breaks the SMT, right? EMD is the middle asset, right? But like YM and RTY, they're lagging asset and leading. That's almost never the case in my findings, right? And that's really not the highest probability. It's almost like as if ES was leading, right? That really wouldn't be like a high probability SMT, which potentially could explain why the SMT failed, but I'm not gonna go as far as to say that. Okay then, so if YM is the leading asset, that means that it should actually go higher, right? But YM never resyncs, YM never expands away from that strong suit PSP, which again, it's just between middle asset and leading asset. So what does that say to us is that EMD and RTY are just decoupled and it must hit something to resync, right? And that's exactly what they do. They hit higher day and that 4-hour gap on RTY, and that resyncs price, right? Something to know here is that, in my opinion, it is valuable to know that EMD, since it's technically here, it has a very small range, it's gonna trade into higher day first. So we wanna see if EMD trades into that and potentially reverse it, because we don't need RTY to hit that 4-hour key level if EMD actually reverses off of higher day, right? So this is something valuable to know. All right, but like you guys might be asking me, why am I showcasing so many SMT break sequences? And again, I'm here to remind you that if you did not know about EMD, it'd be very hard to even get any cross correlation between YM-RTY and a reversal, right? A reversal of this type, where it's SMT break. And also, strong switch, which is the ideal confirmation you get to an SMT break sequence or any reversal in general. But the best strong switch in an SMT break sequence is always going to be between the lagging asset and the leading, right? And in this case, we know that most of the time it's RTY and YM that are the lagging asset, or the leading can be EMD. Which again just explains that this asset probably more valuable than we might have thought. But let's go over some advanced business consequences, right? All right, so this is the 27th of July, 2026. And yeah, let's go look at daily. All right, so we have a daily range high to range low over period ranges. So we manipulate the range high. This is also a new weekly open, so a new weekly candle. We open high into that key level. So this asset is above the high, but this is in premium, right? And this also is like above EQ the range. It's perfect. We also want to pair this SMT here with a pair, like not necessarily want to pair, but in this case we do get it, which is perfect, right? We get a manipulation of a high, which is also an SMT break because that's already traded through this high, but then reverse, right? So let's go ahead and look inside of this day right here. We're going to look at the 4-hour. This profile is actually perfect, right? Every asset opens high. As you can see, we do engage with this high, do reverse. No. So we must break the SMT. That is the ideal sequence, right? And that's exactly what we do. Again, the profile here is perfect because we open high into the SMT break. Well, this asset holds it, right? And if you look closely, YM is going to be the middle asset in this sequence. EMD is the lagging asset and RTY is the leading, right? So what do we get at the reversal at 6? We get strong switch between what? Between EMD and RTY. If you look at these two, again, you're only going to be framing like a reversal off of SMT break. And in this case, the rush tree is a 2-stage between these two. So we'll go over that in a second. And there it is right here. After the SMT break and the strong switch, we also get strong switch PSP here, right? Well, really not strong switch PSP. Well, if you look at these slides, really with this strong switch, that's not really how this is, but it's if you frame this overall SMT right here, then yes, this asset that breaks the SMT with the current higher that prints bullish, well, this asset that has the overall SMT with this high prints bearish, right? But if you look at this triad, that strong switch is just not really needed, right? If you look, we already had it. We could trade this reversal. Now, one kind of keeps running through the high, which is not ideal. So we probably want to see a lower time frame SMT break, which is exactly what we get here. But if you look at EMD, which is, in my opinion, this really adds confidence. So this reverses and already hits low day. Once it does that, it does not reverse, which is ideal, right? We're gonna see that. Now this switches to the leading asset, right? So it hits this low, fails to manipulate it. Obviously, you have the newbie opening gap as a draw as well. And so that means that these two assets are probably gonna get to the same low. Okay, so there it is. I personally took this paper trade, which is an RTY, right? And that right there is the SMT break. And you guys also took it. So again, you can probably use this SMT break plus PSP to frame lower prices, but was that required, right? That is my question to you. What if you knew that the SMT on the daily time frame wasn't between just the fair swing, right? Daily fair swing, because if I go back here, if you guys look, between these two assets, there's really no SMT with a range high. If anything, this asset just manipulating a fair swing, right? It's very close proximity. So this isn't premium, this isn't EQ the range. Like this really adds context as to why we reverse here this day, right? So that's my question to you. And what if the 15-minute strength PSP wasn't required, but just the cherry on top? Okay, so let's go next. So what about some event print discount, side event print discount? So this is very recent. Unfortunately though, there is no strong switch. But that doesn't mean that you can't trade it. But yeah, we'll go over that as well. So here it is, 19th of August, 2026, all right? So here is an SMT break sequence on the daily. So this asset runs through this high, which again, it's not really a daily swing. And this is previous week's high right here. But this is a daily swing here. Does this also reverse? No, so ideally we break the SMT and that causes a reversal. So now, once we break the SMT, we also have SMT with previous week's high right here in the form of overall best friend discount. Both of these two assets are above the range high, but this is like in EQ the range. Again, it's not really a deal that both of these two are above the high, but yeah, we do expand away and create a gap on YM. So we could potentially use that to frame lower prices, right? So let's go look inside this day right here. What happened, right? So we open low, we expand higher, right, into previous day's high. And right here, as you can see, this asset stays in the EQ of the range. Now, do we get strong switch? Not really. So it's not really the most ideal thing. again, it will probably be our retracement on these two assets. That doesn't mean you can't trade it, doesn't mean it's invalid or whatnot. It's just this asset is going to expand, potentially take out the current low day, but these assets will retrace perhaps into the this far gap, which was still to be created still. Right, so then we look inside the current day's range. So these two assets are way above in premium, right? This asset takes the current high day, right? This asset comes very close to it, but where is EMD? EMD is like at EQ the range, right? You can see TAM opens low, leaves literally fair swings, comes back all the way to EQ the range, and then we get what? Strength through PSP. But this strength through PSP is made higher probable because it's with this asset, right? It's between the lagging asset and the leading asset. Now again, I personally wouldn't trade these two, knowing this isn't all EMD, obviously. You ideally will want to trade EMD to this low, or if you're going to trade an asset, will probably RTY to this range low. This in EQ the range, right? Because this asset is obviously going to hit this low first if they all reverse, right? And again, this is a very recent example. This is something UV took. So I'm pretty sure he took YM here. And I don't know if he hit TP, wherever, it doesn't really matter. It's just explaining that in this case here, you're trading the lagging asset. So ideally, like if you knew, obviously, like I'm assuming here, UV didn't know about this asset. And if this actually is the third asset in this triad and it's valuable, then this trade usually you wouldn't take. You would probably take this or RTY, right? Because they're closer to objective. Or even if you take this trade, because you do actually get strength through PSP, again, you probably know this is a retracement. You definitely want to know when this asset reaches objective, right? When this asset reaches EQ the range, that probably will allow YM to expand past that, right? Since the daily range is very, very large. So that's something valuable to just know. All right then, so this is pretty much it for the examples I've so far wanted to showcase, and I will keep this presentation updated more likely than not. But yeah, these are plenty of examples to really showcase the fact that it's very likely that YM-RTY are just the middle asset, and then EMD completes the triad, right? This is where I wanted to get. There are very little universal sequence showcases here, and that is on purpose because you will get universal sequences between YM-RTY very often, right? They're not like very spare, but EMD does add context to them, right, as well, especially reversals. All right, so let's go over the conclusion of this presentation here. And it's gonna be my thoughts here on my own conclusion about this asset. So to me, it's like very clear that EMD here, for me, is very valuable. It's gonna be valuable. I'm gonna be using it to trade YM-RTY, right? And I hope we can probably agree that, you know, it's probably worth it to just keep an eye on it at least, right? The fact that you can understand now SMT break sequences and you can trade them knowing that there is strength switch between the lagging asset and the leading asset, that to me alone, it's very, very valuable, right? And something I didn't talk about a lot, especially during the examples, just once, is that by knowing what YM is in both triads, you can avoid trading it, right? If it's the lagging asset in both triads, probably not worth to trade it, right? Unless it does resync it, unless there is strength switch, right? But what if there isn't strength in the main triad, but there is strength between YM and EMD, right? That could be something you could potentially trade as well. All right then, so personally, I am gonna be using EMD, but as more so as an added confluence, right? I'm looking forward to potentially trading this triad on its own when, for example, we are decoupled in the main indices triad, right? So, and another way I'll be using EMD is I personally to validate a gap, right? As a valid key level, I require 2 assets in a given triad to have that gap. Now that's personal preference. It's not something like Gary teaches or whatnot, but that's just me. So in this case, I will be using EMD to do that in its own triad, right? So that's pretty much gonna be all for this presentation. I really hope you guys are interested in this asset and that you at least look into it just a little bit. You don't have to like permanently have it in your watch list. I really hope you just look at it into it and actually find value in it. So yeah, but even if you don't do that, that's totally fine. Alright. But I hope I can you can learn something from this slide, from this presentation, which is gonna be in the next slide right here. Right? And that is to never stop learning, right? Never stop questioning what you know, right? If I never question the fact that YM and RTY were a diet, right? Like why are they a diet, right? Why can't they not be a triad, right? It's kind of weird, right? If I never questioned that, you know, I would never have found out about this asset, done this research, and then produced this presentation. So, I mean, your mentors, right? They don't know everything. And there will always be something new to discover. So don't stop where others found success, just go beyond. And this is going to be a final question here if you guys would like to reply to this. You know, you don't have to, but yeah. I'm going to obviously be sharing this presentation with you. And thank you. That is all.